The North Atlantic, December 4th, 1872. The sky is the colour of old pewter, low and featureless, pressing down on a sea that moves in long dark swells. The wind is steady from the northwest, cold in the way that only open ocean cold can be. Not the sharp bite of a winter street corner, but something that settles into the body slowly, that finds the gaps in wool and stays there, patient and deliberate. The British brigantine Dei Gratia has been at sea for weeks, bound from New York to Gibraltar with a cargo of petroleum. Routine passage, experienced crew. Captain David Morehouse, a competent and careful man, has made this kind of crossing before. There is nothing on this afternoon to distinguish it from any other, until the helmsman calls out and points to a sail on the horizon. Not distressed, not signalling, just wrong. The way a person walking toward you on an empty road can seem wrong before you understand why, before your mind has named what your instincts already know. Morehouse raises his glass and watches. The vessel ahead is partly rigged, sails set in a configuration that no deliberate hand would choose. Some are properly deployed and catching wind. Others hang at wrong angles. One sail missing entirely from its yard. The remaining canvas doing contradictory work, pushing the ship in arcs rather than on any heading. She yaws in the swell, correcting nothing, answering to no one, moving the way a sleeping thing moves, without purpose or destination. He hails her across the water. The sound travels and dies. No answering voice, no movement on deck, no face appearing at the rail to wave or signal, no distress flag flying from her mast, which is its own kind of wrongness. A ship in trouble flies her flag. A ship at rest flies her flag. A ship doing ordinary business, in ordinary water, flies her flag. This ship flies nothing. She simply drifts, and the silence coming off her is absolute. Morehouse watches for 20 minutes. Then he calls for his first mate. Oliver Devoe takes 2 men and rows across. The crossing is short, the swell manageable. The brigantine ahead grows larger as they approach, her name visible on the hull as they draw alongside. Mary Celeste, 428 tons, built in Nova Scotia, registered in New York. A working vessel, solid, unremarkable. The kind of ship that crosses the Atlantic dozens of times and leaves no particular impression on anyone who cruise or encounters her. Devoe climbs the rope ladder to the deck. His 2 men follow. You step onto the deck. The wood is wet beneath your boots. The rigging slack in places it should be taut, a loose line tapping rhythmically against the lower mast. The sound is the only sound. No voices from the cabin below. No bell. No movement behind the windows of the deckhouse. Just the tap of rope against wood, the low groan of the hull in the swell, and wind moving through canvas that has no one to trim it. The wheel is unmanned. When Devoe steps to it and tests it, he finds it slightly damaged, the housing cracked, as though something struck it with force or it was spun too hard against a stop. The binnacle that should protect the compass has been knocked from its mounting. The compass itself is ruined and useless. One of the ship's 2 pumps has been removed from its housing and left on the deck in pieces, as though someone began work on it and walked away mid-task. A sounding rod, used to measure water depth in the hold, lies on the deck beside the pump, set down in a hurry, or simply abandoned, and the lifeboat is gone. The mounting position where the ship's yawl should rest is empty, the fitting still in place, a length of frayed rope trailing from one attachment point and ending in nothing. Not cut, frayed, the fibers splayed and separated the way rope separates when it parts under tension, when the load exceeds what the line can hold. Below deck, Devoe moves through the cabin slowly. The captain's quarters are undisturbed in a way that is itself disturbing. Clothing folded and stowed, personal items in their places, a woman's dresses hanging from the rack along the bulkhead, her brushes and small possessions arranged on the shelf above the bunk, with the orderly habit of someone who has learned to keep a tidy cabin on a moving ship. On the floor near the lower bunk, a pair of small shoes, child shoes, the kind made for a child who has only recently learned to walk, who still needs the solid reassurance of a flat sole and a wide toe. On the table in the main cabin, a small reed organ, a melodeon, sits undamaged, its keys dry, its bellows intact. Beside it, a child's practice slate, letters chalked in an unsteady hand, the lesson abandoned mid-word. The sewing basket is still open. A thimble rests on the table beside it. A child's toy lies on the bunk, waiting for hands that have not come back to collect it. Devo checks the cargo hold. The hatch is secured. He opens it and descends. 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, bound for Genoa, Italy. He checks the manifest, against what he finds. Everything accounted for. The cargo has not been touched. This ship has not been robbed. He goes back through the cabins. The ship's official papers are gone from the captain's desk. The registration documents, the crew manifest, the cargo documentation. The captain's navigational instruments are missing. The chronometer, the sextant, the navigation book in which a working captain records the calculations that keep a ship on course. These are the things a captain takes when he intends to navigate. They were not left behind. Everything else was. Now, popular legend has long insisted that Deveau found a meal still warm on the galley table when he boarded. Half-eaten food, coffee still hot, breakfast interrupted by whatever took the crew. It is a compelling image. It has been repeated in newspapers, novels, and documentaries for 150 years. It is also not supported by a single line of the actual testimony Deveau gave at the Gibraltar inquiry. What he found in the galley was food stores present and undisturbed, evidence of a functioning ship kitchen, nothing more. The myth of the warm breakfast was invented by a fiction writer decades after the event, and absorbed so thoroughly into the story that it eventually became indistinguishable from fact. The truth, as it turns out, is strange enough without it. Deveau finds the ship's log in the mate's cabin and opens it to the final entry. November 25th, 1872, 8 in the morning. Position recorded. The ship was in the waters near Santa Maria Island, easternmost of the Azores. Weather noted. Conditions described as manageable. The entry is routine in tone, careful in its notations. The handwriting of a man who is doing his job correctly and has no reason to believe the day will be anything other than ordinary, than nothing. The log goes silent for 9 days. The Mary Celeste was found approximately 400 nautical miles west of the position recorded in that final entry. She had been at sea, without a crew, without a hand on her wheel, without anyone to read her sails or correct her heading or pump her hold or keep watch through the night, for 9 days. And in those 9 days, she had travelled not in the circles of pure drift, but with enough of a heading to suggest that her sails, wrongly set as they were, had been pushing her somewhere, even if nowhere in particular. 10 people had been aboard this ship when she left New York on November 7th, 1872. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 experienced crewmen. 10 people in one lifeboat. The lifeboat was gone. The people were gone. The cargo was untouched. The personal belongings were undisturbed. The melodeon sat silent in the captain's cabin. The child's shoes waited on the floor. For 9 days, the Mary Celeste had sailed without a voice, without a captain, without explanation. The log of the Mary Celeste begins on November 7th, 1872, the day she left New York Harbor, and it ends on November 25th. 18 days of entries, 18 days of routine notation, position fixes, weather observations, sail adjustments, the ordinary administrative record of a working ship crossing the North Atlantic in autumn, and then silence. To understand what the silence means, you have to understand what the entries before it say. Not just the final one, but all of them. Because the log of the Mary Celeste is not the record of a voyage going wrong. It is the record of a voyage going exactly as expected, handled by a crew that knew what it was doing, until the moment it simply stops. The first week out of New York was rough. The Atlantic in early November is not a hospitable ocean. The log entries from the 7th through the 15th record difficult conditions, heavy seas, strong winds, the kind of weather that tests rigging and crew in equal measure. The ship took water, sails required constant management, but the entries remain controlled, professional, the handwriting steady, the observations precise. Nothing in those entries suggests a crew in difficulty beyond the ordinary difficulty of the North Atlantic in autumn. By the 3rd week, conditions had improved. The ship was making progress toward the Azores, the mid-ocean island chain that serves as a waypoint for ships crossing between North America and southern Europe. The entries from the 20th onward record calmer seas, better wind, reasonable progress, a ship and crew settling into the rhythm of a passage that was going according to plan. The final entry is dated November 25th, 1872, 8 o'clock in the morning. The position recorded places the Mary Celeste at approximately 37 degrees north latitude and 17 degrees west longitude in the waters near Santa Maria Island, the easternmost island of the Azores. The weather notation describes the wind as fresh from the northwest. The sea state is recorded as moderate. The ship's heading and speed are noted with the same care as every entry before it. There is nothing in this entry that functions as a farewell. No warning, no distress, no suggestion that the man writing it believed it would be the last thing he wrote in this log. It reads as a morning entry, written by someone who expected to write another one that afternoon. And then, he did not. That man was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, captain of the Mary Celeste, and understanding him is essential to understanding why what happened is so difficult to accept as the result of negligence or panic or poor judgment. Briggs was 37 years old in the autumn of 1872. He had been at sea since his teens, working his way up through the merchant marine with the kind of steady accumulating competence that earns a man a captaincy, not through luck or connection, but through demonstrated ability. He came from a seafaring family in Wareham, Massachusetts. His father had been a captain. 2 of his brothers were captains. The sea was not an adventure for Benjamin Briggs. It was his profession, and he approached it with the seriousness of a man who understood its costs. He was known among those who employed him as reliable and calm, not given to recklessness, not given to panic. He had, on at least one previous occasion, declined a command he did not feel fully confident in, a decision that cost him income but reflected a standard of judgment that his employers respected. He was deeply religious, a church-going man whose faith was not performative but practical, a framework for making decisions in difficult circumstances that he applied consistently and without drama. He was not the kind of man who abandoned a sound ship. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, was 30 years old, a woman of education and musical ability who had made ocean voyages before and was not naive about what they involved. She brought her melodeon aboard, not as a whim but as a deliberate choice. Music was part of how she lived, and she saw no reason to leave it behind for a passage of several weeks. She wrote letters. She read. She was, by every account, a composed and capable woman. she also brought their daughter. Sophia Matilda Briggs was 2 years old. The decision to bring a 2-year-old on a transatlantic cargo voyage is, to a modern reader, startling. But it was not unusual in the context of 19th century merchant seafaring, where captains' wives and children frequently made voyages, and where the alternative, leaving a 2-year-old in the care of others for months, was its own hardship. Briggs had left his older son Arthur behind in Massachusetts, in the care of his mother. Sophia came with them. The presence of that child aboard the Mary Celeste is one of the most significant facts in this entire story. Not because it is tragic, though it is, but because of what it tells us about Benjamin Briggs's assessment of the voyage before it began. He would not have brought his wife and his 2-year-old daughter onto a ship he had doubts about. The Mary Celeste had been recently refitted and was in good condition. The route was standard. The season was late, but not beyond normal practice. Briggs looked at all of it and decided it was safe to bring his family. That judgment matters when we try to understand what happened later. The 7 crewmen were experienced sailors, largely of German and American origin, none with criminal records, none with documented histories of conflict or instability. The crew manifest that survives shows a professional complement for a vessel of this type and this route. There is no evidence of tension between the captain and crew before departure, no record of grievances, no suggestion from anyone who knew them that this was a voyage beginning under any kind of shadow. They left New York on November 7th. The cargo they carried was 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, denatured ethyl alcohol, intended for the Italian wine industry in Genoa, where it would be used to fortify wine rather than consumed directly. The shipper was Meissner Ackermann and Company. The cargo was loaded, manifested, and sealed before departure. When the Mary Celeste was boarded by DeVoe on December 4th, and the cargo hold was inspected, 1,692 barrels were found intact. 9 barrels were empty, not broken, not leaking, empty, in the way that a container becomes empty when its contents have slowly passed through its walls over time. The 9 empty barrels had been made of red oak, a wood routinely used for barrel construction in the 19th century, but known to be more porous than other varieties, particularly under conditions of changing temperature and pressure. The alcohol had not spilled. It had seeped, slowly, through the grain of the wood, and then evaporated. Or rather, it had not fully evaporated. Not in any sense that would have left the hold safe. Industrial alcohol evaporating from porous barrels in an enclosed space does not simply disappear. It becomes vapor. It becomes an invisible presence that accumulates in the air of the hold, heaviest at the lower levels, building concentration slowly over days or weeks. It cannot be smelled reliably in dilute concentration. It cannot be seen under any conditions. It is not detectable by any instrument that existed on a merchant vessel in 1872. An insufficient concentration in an enclosed space. It is explosive. This is not a dramatic embellishment. It is the straightforward chemistry of what was sitting in the hold of the Mary Celeste during those 18 days at sea. The rough weather of the first week would have shifted the barrels, stressed their staves, possibly accelerated the seepage. The warming temperatures as the ship moved south toward the Azores would have increased the rate of evaporation. By November 25th, the concentration of alcohol vapor in the hold of that ship may have been approaching dangerous levels, without anyone aboard having any reliable way to know it. The log does not mention the cargo behaving unusually. It does not mention any smell from the hold, any concern about the barrels, any decision to inspect the cargo more carefully than routine. But the absence of these notations does not mean the situation was not developing. It means no one had yet opened the hold and encountered what was building inside it. And then, On November 25th, the log stops, not with alarm, not with a final desperate entry recording some sudden catastrophe, simply stops, in the middle of what appeared to be an ordinary morning, at a position near the Azores, in moderate seas, with fresh wind from the northwest. A captain took his morning reading, recorded his position, noted the weather, and put down his pen. The Mary Celeste was found 9 days later, 400 nautical miles from that position, with her cargo intact, her personal belongings undisturbed, her crew gone, and 9 empty red oak barrels sitting in her hold, like a question no one had thought to ask until it was the only question left. If nothing was wrong, why does the log suddenly stop? To understand what likely happened on the morning of November 25th, 1872, you have to go down into the hold. Not metaphorically, physically. You have to descend the ladder from the main deck, move through the between-deck space, and open the cargo hatch. You have to stand in the space where 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol have been sitting for 18 days, in a hull that has flexed and groaned through rough early weather, in temperatures that have been rising slowly as the ship moves south toward the Azores. You have to stand there in the dark and breathe the air that the crew of the Mary Celeste was breathing, and understand what that air contained. The 9 empty barrels were made of red oak. This detail, which appears in the Gibraltar Inquiry records as a minor notation about cargo condition, is in fact the hinge on which the entire story turns. Red oak is a functional barrel wood. It is strong and widely available. And in the 19th century, it was commonly used for industrial containers carrying products that were not intended for human consumption. But red oak has a property that coopers and shippers understood and accepted as a minor inconvenience. It is porous. More porous than white oak, more porous than other hardwoods used for premium cooperage. Liquid stored in red oak barrels over time and under varying conditions of temperature and pressure does not always stay in the barrel. It migrates slowly through the grain of the wood, following the path that liquids take through porous materials until it reaches the outer surface and evaporates into the surrounding air. 9 barrels had done exactly this during the passage from New York. The alcohol they contained, industrial grade, denatured, not intended for drinking but chemically similar to the alcohol in any flammable liquid, had seeped through the wood over 18 days of a voyage that included a week of rough weather, significant temperature variation, and the constant mechanical stress of a hull working in heavy seas. By the time the Mary Celeste approached the Azores, those 9 barrels were empty, and their contents were no longer liquid. They were vapor. They were atmosphere. They were the invisible, odorless, accumulating presence in the enclosed space of the hold that no one aboard had any reliable instrument to detect. Consider the arithmetic of what this means. 9 barrels of industrial alcohol evaporated into the volume of air contained in the cargo hold of a 428-ton brigantine produces a vapor concentration that would have been well within the explosive range for ethyl alcohol in air. The lower explosive limit for alcohol vapor in air is approximately 3% by volume. The upper limit is approximately 19%. Within that range, an ignition source, a spark, an open flame, even in some conditions, the heat of a lantern at sufficient proximity can produce a rapid pressure event, an explosion, not necessarily a large explosion, not necessarily a destructive one, not necessarily one that would leave fire damage on the hull, or shatter the hatch covers, or rupture the barrels, or produce any of the visible evidence of catastrophic detonation that would make the event unmistakable from the outside. A pressure explosion in a contained space, where the vapor concentration is at the lower end of the explosive range, can produce something more like a very loud, very sudden concussive event. A thud felt through the hull, a pressure wave, a sound that, in an enclosed wooden ship, would travel through every surface, up through the deck planking, into the cabins, into the bones of everyone aboard, loud enough to terrify, not necessarily destructive enough to kill. This is the theory that the Gibraltar Inquiry began to develop in 1872, and that researchers and maritime historians have returned to repeatedly in the century and a half since, because it fits the physical evidence with a precision that no other explanation matches. No fire damage on the ship, no structural damage to the hold, cargo intact, 9 empty red oak barrels, a crew that left in a hurry but took navigational instruments, suggesting they expected to navigate back. Now put yourself on the deck of the Mary Celeste on the morning of November 25th. The weather has improved from the brutal first week. The seas are moderate. The wind is fresh from the northwest. It is, by the log's own account, a manageable morning. The kind of morning where, after a rough passage, the crew begins to relax slightly, to move through their duties with something approaching routine ease. At some point during that morning, someone opens the cargo hatch. It may have been for routine inspection. It may have been because someone noticed the hatch covers bulging slightly, under internal pressure, a physical sign that vapor had been building. It may have been simply because the time had come in the regular maintenance schedule to check on the cargo. The reason does not particularly matter. What matters is that the hatch opens, and the pressure differential between the vapor-saturated air in the hold and the fresh Atlantic air above it produces the event that has been building for 18 days. The sound comes up through the deck like something alive. It is not a gentle sound. It is not the familiar creak and groan of a ship working in a seaway. Sounds that experienced sailors filter automatically from conscious attention because they are the background noise of their lives. This is a concussive thud, deep and resonant, felt as much as heard, traveling through the planking under your feet and up through your legs and into your chest. The ship shudders. Something in the hold shifts. A barrel rolling against its neighbors. The sound of wood on wood in the enclosed space amplified into something that sounds like the beginning of something. Much worse. Captain Briggs is on deck when it happens, or he is in his cabin and the sound brings him on deck in seconds. Either way, he is now standing at the open hatch or beside it, and he is making a calculation that no instrument he carries can help him with. He cannot see into the hold clearly. The vapor, if it is still present in significant concentration, is invisible. He cannot smell it reliably. He does not know if what just happened was a minor pressure release, the hold effectively venting itself and the danger now past, or whether it was the first event in a sequence that will end with the ship on fire. He has no way to know. He has no gas detection equipment, because such equipment does not exist in any form accessible to a merchant vessel captain in 1872. He has his eyes, his nose, his experience, and his judgment, and none of them can tell him with certainty what is in the air below his feet. What he does know is this: he has his wife aboard. He has his 2-year-old daughter aboard. He has 7 crewmen in his care, and the cargo in the hold of his ship is 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol that, if ignited, will turn the Mary Celeste into a furnace from which no one will escape. The decision he makes is not cowardice. It is not panic. It is not the action of a reckless or incompetent man. It is the decision that a careful, experienced, deeply responsible captain makes when the potential consequence of being wrong is the deaths of everyone he is responsible for. He orders the crew off the ship, not permanently. This is the detail that separates the alcohol vapor theory from a simple story of abandonment. Every piece of physical evidence found on the Mary Celeste when she was boarded 9 days later is consistent with a crew that left in a hurry, but left with the intention of returning. The personal belongings are not packed. The melodeon is still in the cabin. Sophia's shoes are still on the floor. The cargo is untouched. The food stores are present. These are not the possessions of people who believed they were leaving forever. These are the possessions of people who expected to come back. Briggs takes his navigational instruments, the chronometer, the sextant, the navigation book. Because he is a navigator, and a navigator does not leave his instruments behind when he may need to calculate a return course. This is not evidence of permanent flight. It is evidence of professional habit in a man who is thinking clearly under pressure. The lifeboat is lowered. All 10 of them get in. Briggs, Sarah, Sophia, the 7 crewmen. The yawl is not cast off. It is tethered to the Mary Celeste by a line, kept close, the intention being to wait at a safe distance while they watch to see if smoke or fire appears, to allow time for whatever vapor remains in the hold to dissipate into the open air, and then to row back and reboard when it is clear the danger has passed. This is a rational plan. It is the plan of a man who is trying to protect his people from a threat he cannot quantify, using the only tool available to him, which is distance and time. The rope holds them, perhaps 100 feet from the ship, perhaps less. The Mary Celeste, with her sails still set, still catching the northwest wind, is not stationary. She is moving, slowly but moving, and the lifeboat moves with her, tethered, pulled along in her wake, while 10 people watch the hatch for smoke and find none. Minutes pass, perhaps longer, and then the wind shifts. It does not need to shift dramatically. A change in direction, a slight increase in strength, and the Mary Celeste responds the way a sailed vessel responds. She adjusts her heading, her speed changes, the angle of her movement relative to the lifeboat changes. The rope that connects them goes taut. The strain on the line increases. The line, already frayed or improperly secured in the urgency of lowering the boat, takes the load. The frayed end, found trailing from the Mary Celeste's yawl mounting when DeVoe boarded her, tells the rest of this part of the story, without words. The rope parted, not cut, not untied, parted under tension, the way rope parts, when it has been pushed past what it can hold. In an instant, the equation of the situation changes completely. They are no longer 10 people waiting cautiously at a safe distance from a possibly dangerous ship, connected to it, in control of the distance between themselves and safety. They are 10 people in an open lifeboat in the North Atlantic, watching their ship sail away from them, and they cannot stop it. They row. Of course they row. Briggs would have had them rowing within seconds of the rope parting, every available person pulling, the small yawl churning toward the Mary Celeste with everything they had. But a brigantine with sails set and wind behind her moves faster than 10 exhausted, frightened people in a small wooden boat. The gap between them does not close. It grows. The Mary Celeste sails on. No fire, no explosion, no catastrophe visible from the lifeboat. The hold that terrified them into the water has not ignited. The vapor has dispersed into the open air through the hatch they opened. The ship that was potentially a bomb 20 minutes ago is now simply a ship sailing away from them, intact, undamaged, carrying everything they own and everything they need, and getting smaller on the horizon. And for the next several days, they were alive. The yawl of the Mary Celeste was a small wooden boat, designed for the kind of short-distance work that ship's boats are built for, ferrying crew to shore and harbour, running lines between vessels in calm water, crossing the modest gap between a ship at anchor and a nearby dock in conditions that do not test the limits of what a small open boat can withstand. It was not designed for the open North Atlantic in late November. It was not provisioned for days at sea. It was not built to carry 10 people through ocean swells in deteriorating weather, with no shelter from wind or spray, or the particular cold that the Atlantic delivers in the final weeks of autumn. The kind of cold that does not strike a person down at once, but works on them hour by hour, degree by degree, drawing heat from the body faster than the body can generate it, until the effort of staying warm becomes the only effort that matters, and everything else, rowing, thinking, hoping, becomes secondary to that single, consuming need. 10 people got into that boat. We know their names. Benjamin Briggs, 37 years old, captain, experienced, carrying his navigational instruments, because he was the kind of man who kept his instruments close and his judgment closer. Sarah Briggs, 30 years old, composed and capable, who had made ocean passages before and understood what they demanded. Sophia Matilda Briggs, 2 years old, who knew none of this and understood only that she was cold, and that the familiar warmth of the cabin was gone, and that the adults around her were holding themselves in the particular rigid way that adults hold themselves when they are frightened and trying not to show it. 7 crewmen, experienced sailors, men who had signed articles for a straightforward Atlantic crossing, and were now sitting in an open boat, watching their ship sail away from them across water that had no interest in their survival. The water temperature in that part of the North Atlantic in late November sits between 15 and 18 degrees Celsius. The air temperature at night would have fallen further, carried lower by the northwest wind that the final log entry had noted as fresh and steady. These are not the temperatures that kill a person in minutes the way truly Arctic water does, but they are temperatures that do sustained cumulative damage to a body with no shelter and no means of generating heat beyond the diminishing reserves of its own metabolism, wet clothing, and in an open boat, taking spray over the bow with every 3rd or 4th swell. Clothing becomes wet quickly and stays wet, loses most of its insulating value within the first hour. Wind pulls heat from exposed skin at a rate that the raw air temperature understates. A person sitting still, which is what most of the people in that lifeboat would necessarily have been doing for most of their time in it, loses heat faster than a person moving. And the people who were rowing were expending energy their bodies could not sustainably replace from whatever food supply had been seized in the minutes between Briggs's order to abandon and the lowering of the yawl. Sophia was 2 years old. A child's body thermoregulates less effectively than an adult's. She had less mass, less insulating tissue, a higher surface area to volume ratio that radiates heat more rapidly into cold air. She would have been the most vulnerable person in that boat from the first hour, and everyone in the boat would have known it, and there was nothing any of them could do about it, beyond wrapping her in whatever clothing could be spared, and holding her close and hoping that land appeared on the horizon before the cold finished its work. Briggs would have taken a celestial observation as soon as conditions and the motion of the boat permitted. He had his sextant, he had his chronometer, he had the navigation book in which he had been recording the ship's position throughout the voyage. He would have worked the calculation with the careful precision of a man who had been doing this for 20 years, and he would have compared the result against the position recorded in the final log entry, and he would have used the difference to estimate how far they were from Santa Maria Island and how long it would take to row there. The question of how accurate that calculation was is one that cannot be answered with certainty from the records that survive, but it is a question that matters enormously to what happened next. The Mary Celeste had spent her first week at sea in rough conditions that made precise celestial navigation difficult or impossible for extended periods. Dead reckoning, estimating position, from known speed, heading, and elapsed time, accumulates error with every hour that passes, without a confirmed observation, to correct it. A week of cloud cover and heavy weather can displace a navigator's estimated position from his actual position by a margin that is invisible until conditions clear and the stars can be properly observed. If Briggs's position on the morning of November 25th was accurate, the Eastern Azores were within a distance that experienced men rowing in shifts might reasonably expect to cover in a day. Perhaps two, if it carried the accumulated error of a difficult first week, they may have been further from land than he believed. Not catastrophically further in absolute terms. Perhaps 20 miles, perhaps 40, perhaps somewhat more. In a vessel under power with food and water aboard, these distances are trivial. In an open lifeboat in late November, rowing into Atlantic swells with a 2-year-old child and limited provisions, the difference between a correct position estimate and one that is 40 miles optimistic is the difference between a story that ends on a beach in the Azores and a story that ends without any ending at all. Briggs would not have shared his uncertainty with the others. He was the captain, and the captain's role in that lifeboat was precisely what it had been on the ship. To make decisions, to project the confidence that keeps people pulling at oars when their bodies are telling them to stop, to maintain the authority that transforms a group of frightened individuals into a crew with a purpose and a direction. A captain who announces to his crew that he may have miscalculated their position does not have a crew that rows hard for much longer. Whatever doubts were developing in Briggs's mind as the first day wore on without land appearing, he would have kept them behind his expression and given his orders calmly and continued to navigate. The first night in that boat would have been the moment when the true nature of the situation became undeniable. Darkness on the open ocean is not the darkness of a room with the lights off. There are no reference points, no fixed shapes to orient the eye, no surfaces to reach out and touch for reassurance. In overcast conditions, which are common in the North Atlantic in autumn, there is no moon and no stars, only the black of the water and the slightly different black of the sky above it, and the constant motion of the swell, and the sound of water against the hull, and the cold. The crewmen would have rowed in shifts through the night to maintain both warmth and progress, 2 or 3 men at the oars while the others huddled in the bottom of the boat, and Briggs would have watched the compass and called corrections to the heading and calculated distance made good against distance remaining, and tried to believe that the numbers were working in their favour. By the second morning, they had not reached land. The Azores had not appeared. The horizon in every direction was water, the same low grey Atlantic swell they had been looking at since the rope parted, and the food and water inventory that someone had quietly conducted in the night. How much had been grabbed, how much had already been consumed, was producing numbers that no one wanted to say aloud. The food and water situation in the lifeboat was governed entirely by what had been seized in the minutes of the evacuation. Ship's boats of this period were not routinely stocked with emergency provisions, the way modern maritime safety regulations would require. There was no grab bag of survival supplies mounted near the yawl for exactly this kind of emergency. What they had was what someone had thought to take in the dark, under the pressure of a moment when the priority was getting 10 people off the ship before it potentially exploded, not ensuring that the lifeboat was provisioned for a multi-day ocean survival situation. That supply, whatever it was, had a finite end, and the end was approaching faster than the Azores were. Dehydration in a cold environment is counterintuitive. The body's thirst response is suppressed in cold conditions, which means people do not feel as thirsty as they are. They drink less than they need. The symptoms, fatigue, confusion, impaired judgment, difficulty concentrating, are easy to attribute to cold and exhaustion and miss the additional contribution of dehydration until it has progressed further than it should have. An experienced sailor in Briggs's position would have known this intellectually. Knowing it and having sufficient water to act on it are different things. Hypothermia progresses through stages that are important to understand because they are not simply a linear decline into unconsciousness. The early stages produce shivering, which is the body's attempt to generate heat through muscle movement, and this shivering consumes energy at a rate that accelerates the body's depletion of its reserves. As core temperature continues to drop, the shivering eventually stops, which feels like an improvement, but is in fact a sign that the body has given up the attempt to warm itself. Confusion follows, then a paradoxical feeling of warmth, which has caused people in the final stages of hypothermia to remove their clothing, then unconsciousness, then death, which arrives quietly and can be mistaken for sleep. The crewmen were the strongest people in that boat in terms of physical mass and conditioning. They would have lasted longer than the others under equivalent conditions, but equivalent conditions were not what they had. They had been doing the physical work of rowing, which depleted their energy reserves faster, and the food supply was not sufficient to replace what they were burning. Sarah Briggs had brought her melodeon onto the Mary Celeste because music was part of how she lived. She had brought a sewing basket. She had been teaching her daughter letters on a chalk slate. She had corresponded warmly with family before departure, describing her husband's confidence in the voyage, the pleasant weather they hoped to find, her anticipation of the journey. She was not a fragile person. She was not naive about the sea. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for an open lifeboat in the North Atlantic in November, and experience is of limited value when the ocean has already decided what it intends to do. At the Gibraltar inquiry, Frederick Solly Flood, the Admiralty Marshal presiding, returned repeatedly to the theory that Morehouse and the Dei Gratia crew had committed violence against the Mary Celeste's complement. He found the circumstance of the two captains having dined together in New York suspicious. He found the condition of the ship suspicious, the absence of damage where he expected damage, the presence of order where he expected disorder. He was a man who had decided what had happened and was looking for evidence to confirm it, which is a method of inquiry that produces conclusions independent of where the evidence actually points. The evidence pointed nowhere near the Dei Gratia. No blood on the ship, no damage consistent with a struggle or an attack, no sign that the vessel had been boarded before Davos crossing. The salvage reward that Morehouse ultimately received after the Gibraltar court's deliberations was 1/8 of the combined assessed value of ship and cargo, a modest sum that represented poor compensation for the risk of a murder conspiracy and the weeks of legal proceedings that followed. Men who plan the killing of 10 people and the theft of a ship do not do it for a modest salvage fraction, awarded by an admiralty court after months of investigation. The conspiracy theory has persisted for 150 years because it offers what the truth does not: a villain, a motive, a human hand behind the tragedy. It is easier to hold in the mind than the alternative, which is that a careful and experienced man made a reasonable decision in response to a genuine threat, that a rope failed at the worst possible moment, and that the ocean received 10 people and kept them. No lifeboat was ever found. No bodies were ever recovered. No wreckage was identified as belonging to the Mary Celeste's missing yawl. The North Atlantic in late November is not a place that preserves evidence of what it takes. It disperses and dilutes, and in time renders the surface as unmarked and indifferent as it was before anything happened at all. The ocean does not return lifeboats. 9 days, November 25th to December 4th, 1872. 9 days between the last entry in the log and the moment Oliver Deveau stepped onto the empty deck of the Mary Celeste and found the wheel unmanned and the compass ruined and the child's shoes waiting on the cabin floor beside the bunk, where a 2-year-old girl had slept on the crossing from New York. We cannot account for those 9 days. Not fully. Not with the certainty that closes a case or satisfies an inquiry, or allows the mind to set the question down and walk away from it. What we have are the physical facts, a position recorded in a log, a distance travelled without a crew, a frayed rope, 9 empty barrels, a missing lifeboat, 10 missing people, and the silence that surrounds them on every side. What we can do is follow the evidence as far as it goes, and then sit with what remains when the evidence runs out, which is the only honest thing to do with a mystery that has never been resolved and likely never will be. This is what 9 days looks like. Day 1. The sound comes up through the deck sometime during the late morning of November 25th, 1872. The thud from the hold, deep and resonant, felt through the planking underfoot, travelling through every surface of the hull, into the bodies of everyone aboard simultaneously. The way sound travels through wood and water, in ways it does not travel through air. The cargo hatch is open, or has just been opened for a routine inspection. The vapour that has been building in the enclosed space of the hold for 18 days finds the pressure differential it has been waiting for and releases. And the sound that results is not the familiar sound of a ship working in a seaway. It is not the creak of timber, or the slap of wave against hull, or the complaint of rigging under load. It is something that does not belong here, something that arrives without warning and fills the ship from keel to masthead in the fraction of a second it takes sound to travel that distance. Captain Briggs is on deck within moments, if he was not already there. He looks at the hatch. He looks at the faces of his crew. He makes his calculation in the seconds available to him. 10 people. One of them his wife. One of them his 2-year-old daughter. 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol in the hold below. No instrument to tell him whether the danger has passed or is only beginning. And he gives the order. The lifeboat goes into the water. All 10 of them descend. The rope is made fast between the yawl and the ship's mounting point, holding them close to the hull, and they drift in the Mary Celeste's wake and watch the hatch for smoke that does not come. The sails are still set from the morning watch. The ship is moving slowly northeast, pushed by the fresh northwest wind the log recorded, and the rope between them is taut, and Briggs is watching the open hatch and the sky above it and making the second calculation of how long they need to wait before it is safe to reboard. The rope parts. It happens in the way that things happen at sea, without announcement, without the pause that human beings instinctively feel such moments deserve. The tension in the line has been building with every degree the ship's heading shifts. Every foot the wind pushes her forward, while the lifeboat sits relatively still in her wake. The frayed fibres at the point of attachment, already stressed by the urgency of the lowering, take the accumulated load and release it, and the Mary Celeste moves away from them, and the gap between the ship and the lifeboat opens faster than it has any right to. They row. Every person who can hold an oar holds one, and they pull with everything they have, and the Mary Celeste continues moving, and the gap continues widening, and the distance between them and the only shelter available to them in this ocean grows until it is no longer a distance that rowing can close. Briggs watches the ship go. He is a navigator and a captain, and he performs the calculation that the situation requires. And the calculation tells him clearly what the growing gap has already told him in a language that needs no numbers. They cannot catch her. He takes a bearing. He gives a heading. They row toward where the Azores must be. Day 2. The night has been cold and long and moonless, and the horizon this morning shows nothing in any direction but water. The same low grey Atlantic swell they have been watching since the rope parted. Sophia has not slept well. The motion of the open boat in the ocean swell is nothing like the motion of the ship's cabin, which was padded and enclosed and familiar, and the cold that comes off the water at night and settles into an open boat is the kind of cold that a 2-year-old cannot regulate against. Sarah has held her through the hours of darkness. sharing what warmth her body can produce. And what her body can produce is already less than. It was yesterday morning when she was still aboard a ship with food and water and dry clothing and 4 walls between her and the Atlantic. The crewmen have rowed through the night in shifts, 2 at the oars while the others hunched in the bottom of the boat against the spray, and the progress made good is less than Briggs calculated when he set the heading yesterday afternoon. The current is running against them, and the wind, that should be helping, has been shifting through the night, pushing them off the bearing they need, so that every hour of rowing has produced less eastward progress than the effort deserved. Briggs takes a morning observation when the sun climbs high enough to shoot. He works the numbers in the navigation book with the careful, habitual precision of a man who has taken thousands of such observations and trusts the process completely. He closes the book. He adjusts the heading slightly and does not explain why. He tells the men to keep rowing. Somewhere to the east and slightly north, the Mary Celeste is still sailing. Day 3. The Azores have not appeared. The food is being rationed now with a quiet, mutual understanding that does not require a formal announcement. Everyone taking less than they want, and no one commenting on what this implies about how long they expect to be in the water. The supply of fresh water is more concerning than the food, because the human body can endure the absence of food far longer than it can endure the absence of water, and the water they had when they left the ship was whatever could be grabbed in the minutes of the evacuation, which was not very much. The crewmen are still rowing, but the intervals have shortened. The rest periods are longer. The conversation in the boat, which was never extensive, has become minimal, everyone conserving what the body spends on speech and directing it instead toward the simpler, more urgent business of staying warm. Sophia is quiet in a way that is not the same as calm. She is watchful and withdrawn, her eyes moving between her mother's face and the water surrounding them, and she is not crying, which at 2 years old in these conditions is not a sign of composure. It is a sign of depletion. Day 4. A clearer morning opens above them, the cloud layer thinning enough to show a pale winter sky that allows the best observation Briggs has been able to take since the rope parted. He works the numbers twice. The position he arrives at does not match the position he has been calculating from dead reckoning, and the difference between them is not minor. The rough first week of the passage from New York has left its accumulated error in the navigation, and a week of calmer conditions before the evacuation was not sufficient to fully correct it with confirmed celestial observations. They are further from the Azores than the final log entry suggested. Not catastrophically further in absolute terms, but further than Briggs told the crew. When he set the heading on day 1, he adjusts the course. He does not share the numbers. He tells the men they are making good progress, and gives the heading and watches the compass, and keeps his face in the arrangement that a captain's face maintains when he is the only person in a boat who knows exactly how bad the situation is. Day 5. The rhythm of the boat has changed in a way that does not need to be spoken about to be understood by everyone in it. The rowing is intermittent now, men pulling for a measured interval and then shipping the oars and resting with their heads down, and their hands in whatever folds of clothing retain some warmth. The boat drifts in the intervals, losing ground against the current, and no one suggests this is unacceptable because everyone understands that the men at the oars have been spending energy their bodies cannot replace from the supply they have left. The water is gone, or nearly gone. The acknowledgement of this, when it comes, settles over the boat the way cold settles, gradually, from the outside in, until it is everywhere at once. Briggs speaks. He gives them what a captain can give when he has nothing material left to offer, which is a direction and a reason to maintain it. And the men accept this, because the alternative to accepting it is accepting something else, and they are not ready to do that yet. Day 6. The cold is no longer a condition that exists outside the body. It lives inside it now, a presence in the chest and behind the eyes and deep in the joints that does not respond to movement the way ordinary cold responds to movement, because the reserves that movement draws on are too depleted to generate the heat that movement is supposed to produce. The crewmen who have been doing the physical labor of rowing for 5 days are exhausted, beyond the kind of exhaustion that sleep repairs. They need warmth and food and water, and the boat has none of these things to give them. Sarah holds Sophia and does not look at the others, and the others do not look at her. Day 7. A decision is made about the oars, though decision may be too deliberate a word for what happens when the body simply reaches the boundary of what it can sustain, and the mind accepts this as information rather than failure. The oars are shipped. The boat drifts. Briggs is still present, still the captain, still watching the compass, still making the calculation that has been his only occupation for 7 days. The numbers in the navigation book are what they are. He's been working them honestly throughout, adjusting for drift and current, correcting for the error in the original position, tracking what progress has been made and what remains. The horizon is the same in every direction. Water and sky meeting in the grey indistinction of a November Atlantic afternoon, offering no landmark and no sail and no reason to believe that anything exists beyond the small wooden world of the lifeboat and the ocean that surrounds it on all sides. Without end. Day 8. The boat is on the water. The Atlantic surrounds it in every direction, without interruption. The people in it are present in the way that people remain present when the body has been spending beyond its means for long enough that the difference between waking and sleeping has become difficult to locate precisely. The chronometer in its box is still ticking. Briggs has been winding it each day from habit, from the professional reflex of a man for whom an unwound chronometer represents a failure of duty so fundamental that the habit survives conditions that have stripped away almost everything else. Whether the winding happens on day 8 is a question the ocean holds along with all the others. Day 9. The Mary Celeste is sailing. She has been sailing alone for 9 days since the rope parted, and she has covered roughly 400 nautical miles on her own heading, with no hand on her wheel and no voice on her deck, and no one to read her sails or correct her, course or pump her hold or stand watch through the long cold nights. Her sails are wrongly set, but set well enough to catch the northwest wind and carry her roughly eastward, roughly toward the Strait of Gibraltar, roughly in the direction she was always bound when she left New York on November 7th, with 10 people aboard and a cargo of 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol and a melodeon in the captain's cabin and a child's shoes on the cabin floor. She does not know where she is going. She does not know what she has left behind. She is wood and rope and canvas, responding to wind and current, with the indifferent obedience of objects that have no choice in the matter, moving toward a discovery that will follow her through 150 years of inquiry and speculation and retelling. Tomorrow, Oliver Devoe will row across to her in the grey December morning and climb the rope ladder to her deck and find everything exactly as it was left on November 25th, undisturbed, waiting, the log open to its final entry, the cargo sealed in the hold, the rope trailing from the yawl mount, the compass ruined, the melodeon silent in the cabin where Sarah Briggs placed it because music was part of how she lived, and she saw no reason to leave it behind. He will carry the mystery back to the Dei Gratia, and from there to Gibraltar, and from there into every newspaper and courtroom and official inquiry and fictional retelling that will accumulate around it for the next century and a half, each one adding its own layer of speculation and invention and misremembering until the embellishments become indistinguishable from the facts, and the facts become harder to find beneath them. What the facts tell us, stripped of everything that has been added to them since, is this: 10 people left a ship for reasons that made sense to the person responsible for their safety. A rope failed at the moment it mattered most. The Atlantic in late November received what the rope delivered to it, and the ship they left behind sailed on without them, intact and undamaged and silent, carrying the evidence of an ordinary life interrupted. A child's shoes, a woman's music, a captain's careful handwriting in a log that simply stops, into a December morning and into the arms of a mystery that has never been solved and never will be. Not completely, not in the way that allows the mind to close the question and move on. The Mary Celeste is still out there in the only way that matters now. In the 9 days no one can account for, and in the 10 people the ocean received and never returned.